Welcome, folks. Welcome. Glad you can join us today. My name is Dwayne Heisler. I'm the campaign director for the Pennsylvania Policy Center. So glad you're able to join us. And I would love if folks could put in their name and the city there or town, anywhere in the state of Pennsylvania that they're, or elsewhere for a matter of fact, that they're joining us from. That'd be great to see all the folks. We always get people from all over the state of Pennsylvania and sometimes outside of it. Go ahead, put your name and pronouns and your location of where we are. I see we have some folks checking it. We got Monco in the house. Hey, Katie, good to see you. We got Harrisburg. Let's see who can get theirs in the fastest. Let's see. We got Luzerne County. Morgan, I know Morgan. Good to see you, Morgan. Philadelphia's in the house. Who else do we have showing up here? Woohoo! There's the hearts. Yeah. Camp Hill. Cool. Cool. You'll get it, Renee. I have faith, but you're in from Clearfield. All right. Good. We have Clearfield in there. Erie. Freda, good to see you. One of our regulars here. Pittsburgh's in the house. Paris. Okay. Not quite sure where Paris is. It Paris, Pennsylvania? Maybe we need a follow up. I've not heard of Paris, Pennsylvania. France, really? Whoa! Look at that. I've heard of Paris. Whoa! Big shout out to Paris. Look at that. One of our guest speakers actually just is coming back from Poland and from Germany. I'm really excited to hear what Kadida Kenner has to say from the New Pennsylvania Project. Part of a conference she was at talking about our democracy, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about here. We got Pittston in the heart of Luzerne County. Wonderful. Huntington. Cool. So if you're just joining us, please pop your name and your location into the chat. And we'll also be using the chat for questions. We have quite a lineup of speakers today that we're excited about. And so we'll be using the chat feature and then coming back to it and doing some Q&A at the end of our call. But okay, I think at this point, what I'd like to do is flip it over to our executive director, Felicity Williams, for the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Felicity.
Thank you, Dwayne. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As Dwayne said, my name is Felicity Williams, and I am the executive director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center. I'm really glad to have you with us for today's Federal Policy Action Call. If you've joined us before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, these calls are one of the ways that we bring people together from across Pennsylvania to understand what's happening in policy, what it means for our communities, and how we can take action together. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. All lines are muted to minimize background noise. But as Dwayne said, we do want this to be interactive. And as you saw at the beginning with having you guys engage in the chat with us. So please drop questions, comments into the chat throughout the conversation. We have folks monitoring those, and we do have time for Q&A later in the program where we will try to get to as many questions as we can. And if you run into any technical issues, just let us know in the chat and our team will do our best to try and support you. As we approach tax day and as federal decisions continue to unfold, we are seeing a clear pattern. The rules of our economy and our democracy are being shaped in ways that concentrate wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands while shifting the burden onto working families and everyday people. At PPC and through our Pennsylvanians Together, we've been clear about what we believe. Our tax system should fund the public investments that make freedom and opportunity possible. It should ensure people can afford the basics: food, healthcare, housing, education, transportation, and that our communities have what they need to thrive. But instead, too often, we see the opposite. We see a system where working people are asked to carry more, while those with the most are protected. And that doesn't just shape our economy, it shapes our democracy. Because when wealth is concentrated, power is concentrated. And when power is concentrated, decisions start to reflect the interests of a few rather than the needs of the many. And I want to name something that we do not always say clearly enough. We often talk about policy decisions in neutral or very technical terms. We talk about cuts. We talk about eligibility. We talk about requirements. But these are not neutral choices. When policies make it harder for people to access food, healthcare, or basic support, there are real consequences. There is harm, there is instability, and in some cases, there is loss of life. As you'll hear more about today, recent analysis has shown that changes to SNAP at the federal level could have devastating long-term impacts, including tens of thousands of avoidable deaths nationwide and over time. And I think it's important that we are honest about the violence that policy decisions can have on our communities. Because when we soften the language, we also soften the urgency. And at the same time, we're seeing efforts that would make it harder for people to participate fully in our democracy. Proposals like the SAVE Act and other actions targeting voter access raise serious concerns about who is able to participate and whose voices are being left out. So when we talk about wealth and democracy, we're talking about a system of rules. Rules that determine who benefits, rules that determine who has a voice, rules that determine whose needs are prioritized. And those rules didn't just happen. They were built over time through policy decisions that have concentrated wealth and influence among a small group of people who have a vested interest in maintaining that system. But just as those rules were built, they can be changed. And that is why spaces like this matter, because this is about more than understanding what's happening. It's about building the awareness, alignment, and action needed to move towards something better. A system where our economy works for the people who make it run, a system where public investments are strong enough to support families and communities, and a democracy that is inclusive, accessible, and reflective of all of us. And I'm really grateful that we have a set of speakers today who are going to help us explore these issues from several important angles. You'll first hear from Kyle Ross of the Center for American Progress, who will help ground us in what's at stake in federal policy decisions, particularly related to SNAP from a recent analysis and what they mean for people's ability to meet basic needs. We'll then hear from Susan Gobreski of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, who will speak to what we're seeing around voting access, including recent proposals and actions that could impact participation and representation. Next, Kadida Kenner of the New Pennsylvania Project will connect these issues to the broader fight for an inclusive democracy and what it takes to ensure all communities are able to fully participate. And finally, John Foti of Americans for Tax Fairness will help us understand how wealth and big money continue to shape our political system and influence the rules that govern our economy and our democracy. Each of these perspectives is critical to understanding the full picture of what's happening right now. So thank you again for being here, for showing up, and for being a part of this work. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dwayne, to get us started.
Thank you for that amazing welcome and opening. This is going to be an exciting call. We have all our speakers lined up, but before we go there, I just want to kind of tap into what everyone's feeling right now. Tax season is on us, right? It's now tax time. And I want to be sure to lift up some of the events that are happening on tax day, starting with the flagship event that we're doing in Harrisburg. And I just dropped in some information on how you can join us in Harrisburg on April 15th. We're having a legislative breakfast and mixer and a press conference and also a film screening that day, all in Harrisburg. The link to join us is right there. We start off with, some of you are familiar with Mr. Riggs on the steps of the Capitol, welcoming legislators to a legislative mixer along with other folks and organizations who will be there to join us and to welcome them to talk about our current tax system and how we need to correct it to make sure it looks out for everyday Pennsylvanians and not just the ultra wealthy billionaires and greedy corporations. So please check us out there. We immediately go from that 8 to 9 o'clock mixer to a press conference where you're welcome to join us as well. And the Mobilize link is right there in the chat. Please feel free to share that and also to attend. And then that evening, we have the director of the film, Death and Taxes, joining us for a screening at the Midtown Cinema on Riley Street in Harrisburg. And then that is going to be followed by a discussion with the director of the film, and also our friends at Moms Rising and Affordable PA will be joining Pennsylvanians together in order to have a discussion about that film. So several things lined up for tax day, and we're really excited about that. And also, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff, to tell us about our state policy action call.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. Yeah, everyone, as you probably know, if you've been here before, we do two policy action Zoom meetings every month. On the first Thursday, typically, right at this time, we do our federal policy action where we focus on how federal issues are impacting Pennsylvanians and how you can take action. Typically on the third Thursday, we do our state policy action meeting where we focus a lot more on state issues and impacts on Pennsylvania. This month, we're actually, because of the big tax day event in Harrisburg, we're going to do our state policy action meeting on the fourth Thursday of the month, which is Thursday, April 23rd at 1 p.m. I just dropped the information there in the chat. Our topic is going to be something that is very topical. Just earlier this week, over the weekend, a lot of folks who are on this call were probably at some of the many No Kings events all over Pennsylvania. I was fortunate enough to be out in Pittsburgh at the time, and I got to attend the Pittsburgh No Kings rally. I'll just say in Pittsburgh, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood characters are to the political protest what Gritty is to Philadelphia protests. It was delightful. It was wonderful. But one of the things we heard a lot about was people's frustration and fears about the war that Trump has started with Iran. Not only has it upset the whole global community and resulted in tremendous suffering and loss of life that continues to go on, but it is an extremely costly war. And we're going to be looking at the issue very closely of how much is this costing Americans, and specifically, how much is this costing us here in Pennsylvania? I've been reaching out to guests today. We are waiting for some confirmations. I think folks are going to be delighted. We'll have a nice lineup of speakers. Again, I would encourage you to register right now. Sign up in the chat there. Click on that link and plan to join us 3 weeks from today on March 23rd at 1 p.m. I'll kick it back over to you, Dwayne. Thanks.
Fantastic, Jeff. I'm really looking forward to that. Okay, let's dig in. And remember, feel free to use the chat in order to pop your questions. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards. We already heard the incredible introduction for Kyle Ross from the Center for American Progress. I wish it was under better circumstances, Kyle, but you did some important work and have a report to share with us. And so I'm just going to flip it right over to you so we can dig in.
Thanks, Dwayne. I will get the sharing process started since my computer's being a little bit slow today, so I'll let that load in the background while I do a little intro here. So thanks for joining everyone today. My name is Kyle Ross. I am a senior policy analyst for the Center for American Progress, their economic policy team in particular. And I spend most of my time usually focused on basic needs programs. SNAP in particular has been a topic that has been recurring in my work for the past couple of years or so, and I can't imagine why. I don't really see there's much going on, but let's talk about what has been happening. Of course, with the most recent HR1 tax law, One Big Beautiful Bill, BBB, whatever you want to call it. There's been a lot of action, discussion, implementation problems surrounding this law, and there's been greater fears as to what could possibly be on the horizon, not only over the course of this year, but over the course of the next couple of years as provisions. Oh my gosh, trying to get my swapped view here. There we go. I think we're finally ready. To get going through the slides here. But over the next couple of years, as provisions start to kind of phase into effect, we're going to see the harms pile up over time. It's already started. I want to make that clear. Implementation for a lot of these provisions have started towards the end of last year, and we're going to be talking about some of the harms that we're already seeing, and then what potential harms are going to be on the horizon, and then what little action, because there is still action that folks can take to mitigate it, or to guarantee that no further harm can be pushed upon folks that are already suffering enough from these cuts. Most recent example I'll be talking about today is on the national level, at least. I estimated that SNAP cuts could lead to 70,000 avoidable deaths. Um, that is a somewhat conservative estimate, even as it's only taking a look at a sliver or a pillar of the cuts, and not everything in their totality. But we'll get into into that in a moment. I do want to just kind of provide a quick refresher here, so that everyone's kind of on the same page in terms of all the different terms and cuts and pillars of cuts I'll be throwing at you. So we rewind back to July 2025 real quick, when the law was passed. This it is considered the largest cuts to SNAP in the program's history, totaling $187 billion over 10 years. There's a lot of cuts in that $187 billion. I won't go through them all, but I'll go through kind of a few key points to remember, and the topic of what today's report is about. First and foremost, the policies that have already been actively going into effect and are into effect as of right now are added barriers to access through what are called expanded work requirements. And I'm trying to really not be too technical here. When we talk about work requirements, you can think of that as like barriers to access. Think about it as red tape. These are essentially extra provisions that require additional paperwork on the behalf of applicants, participants, to demonstrate that they are eligible for the program, particularly through constant demonstration that they're working at least 20 hours a week, 80 hours a month, to maintain compliance and maintain their eligibility. If they can't continuously prove that, they are kicked off of their benefits. And this has been framed as a way to encourage folks to, become more self-sufficient, go out and get a stable job, increase their income, what have you. But as research has consistently shown over time, is that as these work requirement provisions go into effect, as they're expanded to new groups of people, you see participation nosedive, not because they're suddenly ineligible because they make too much money because they have such great new jobs, um, but because they are not able to consistently demonstrate that they are working enough. And many of them, most of them, are in fact working enough, but it's very difficult to demonstrate that, to provide the paperwork on time, consistently, with the correct number of hours. Because a lot of these folks, a lot of these SNAP participants, their work is in very seasonal, inconsistent schedules. Think of the service industry, for example, where you might have enough hours for to maintain compliance for one month, but maybe not the next month, and it kind of flows in and out, and it's really hard to maintain that threshold that they're looking for. So before you know it, someone who has a consistent job can find themselves suddenly ineligible for SNAP benefits. The law, for the very first time, expands these requirements, these burdensome paperwork requirements, I sometimes call them, to families with children, to older Americans, to veterans, people aging out of foster care, people experiencing homelessness, a lot of populations that you think should be pretty well protected. Will be facing the brunt of these cuts. Uh, Additionally, a kind of separate pillar of cuts that we'll talk about in a moment are cost shifts. Two kinds of cost shifts here. You have administrative, which is like funds that pay the SNAP caseworker folks and their training and their online eligibility systems, and benefit cost shifts, which is the actual money, the actual benefits that get sent to folks' EBT cards every month. Federal government is essentially pushing a lot of this emphasis on
Wow.
having states pay for these things. And this is a huge financial burden that they previously did not have to account for. So the fear is that it will lead to a lot of instances where states try to find cost-cutting measures, and that oftentimes could very well look like finding ways to either make it harder for folks to apply and maintain benefits, or finding ways to cut existing folks' benefits in a variety of ways. Lastly, uh, there has been additional provisions in terms of limiting folks' access for lawfully present immigrants, as if our safety net system wasn't already anti-immigrant enough. It turns out there's more room to go, and there are additional groups, particularly refugees and asylees, have been added to the list of folks that are lawfully present in the U.S., but will no longer be eligible for SNAP. So that's the quickest refresher I'm want to give here. There's more to dive into, but those are kind of some of the main top line points into what the research said that I put out is about. So that top line, that 70,000 avoidable deaths number, what is that about? Oh my goodness. Okay. So that is only looking at that first pillar we talked about, the work requirements, the access burdens. It's only looking at that part of the pie of SNAP cuts. Now, this has how we arrived essentially at this estimate is that SNAP itself, access to it is associated with many positive health outcomes. Not only does it lower food insecurity, which is, of course, is tied to better diet quality and fewer instances of malnutrition, but also enables folks to have better access to preventive care. And research has shown that SNAP recipients have lower mortality rates compared to similar non-participants. So okay, if we take estimates from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, who estimate that 2.4 million people will be getting kicked off of their SNAP benefits through these work requirement expansions alone, we take that entire group of people that's getting SNAP and we put that into the folks that are no longer getting SNAP and their associated higher mortality rate, and take essentially a new estimate, a new calculation for what their mortality rates could be over the next couple of years. We estimate out to 2040 for this. So if we look at Pennsylvania in particular, for example, we estimate that 1,300 avoidable deaths uh, within the next 14, 15 years or so to 2040 uh, could happen for folks if they are kicked off of their benefits from work requirements. Now, that there is room for an even worse case scenario. We also looked at an instance of if a state were to completely opt out of the SNAP program entirely, and we were like, well, why would anyone want to do that? That speaks to the cost shift pillar of those cuts that I mentioned. The ultimate fear here, and this is something that CBO, Congressional Budget Office, alluded to when it was estimating the cost of all of these cuts, was a possibility that the new financial burdens states would take on from the administrative and benefit cost shifts could be so great that they'd say, we cannot actually make the budget math work when we are forced to leave the SNAP program. That would mean everybody in the state would lose access to food assistance. We just go, okay, what would avoidable deaths look like in that scenario? And we estimate 31,300 deaths could result from a case where Pennsylvania would opt out of participating in SNAP due to the financial strain that cost shifts would inflict. A not particularly likely scenario I want to put out, but a possibility that is greater than zero nonetheless. So we wanted to kind of put out research, any numbers that folks could use to kind of push back against any lawmaker that would propose this going forward, essentially. Now, unfortunately, we're seeing some of these harms likely already starting to take place. I mentioned that the work requirements kind of pillars are already phasing in, it's already being implemented, and folks are already being unfortunately kicked off their benefits. In Pennsylvania in particular, SNAP data has shown that participation has fallen by about 10% since mid-2025, around when um, HR 1, the tax law, got enacted. That's around 200,000 fewer people that are receiving food assistance as of February compared to around the June, July period of last year. So these cuts are already having real world consequences. We've been talking, or at least I've been talking so long about them being theoretical and projected cuts, estimated cuts. Now we're actually seeing the real world impacts, and we're seeing caseloads take the nosedive that everyone has been saying would happen. And it's not because these folks are going out and getting new jobs and increasing their incomes. They're losing eligibility because of intentional barriers to access that are being put up by this law. So, what to do about it? We have a few options here, fortunately, um, with the main theme being do no more harm. So, what does that look like? Well, there is some flexibility here for the state agency. So, for Pennsylvania's state SNAP agency, for example, to maintain maximum flexibility of interpretation in the law. So states are usually given a lot of a lot of bandwidth with how they go about implementing federal rules. And there's definitely a point to be made, a case to be made about encouraging the administration, the current state administration, to take every opportunity to look for existing exemptions for work requirements. An example here would be that since requirements have been expanded to include older Americans as old as 64 for the first time ever, so folks that are nearing retirement, you could look at that and you could say, okay, well, folks are supposed to be exempt from requirements if they have a disability, for example. And we know that a lot of older folks, a lot of seniors develop disabilities with old age. It makes it much harder for them to work consistently. That's why they leave the labor force and retire. So there's a lot of wiggle room to be made there about how much and to the degree to which you're really enforcing these work requirements for this older population, if you account for these disability protections, as an example. Additionally, pushing state lawmakers to find the sufficient funds needed to ensure that cost shifts don't force more cuts or create more red tape. This is important to make sure that the cuts that we're already seeing, we're not essentially doing more harm. And the ways in which more harm could be created is how states would go about reducing what is called their error rates. The degree to which states will have to start paying for benefits for their cost share for benefits is tied to their error rates. With the incentive being you get it below a certain threshold, to get it below a 6% error rate, you don't have a cost shift. Um, as of 2024, um, Pennsylvania's benefit cost shift would be estimated to be around $636 million. Their admin cost shift about a little over $100 million. And so there's a line of thinking there. If you find ways to uh, make harder, more complex cases lower in frequency, either by making it more difficult for folks to gain and maintain access, or by cutting benefits, that they'll find ways to reduce their error rates. And this is the opposite way we should be going about this. The it is true that lower error rates will result in lower cost shift, and that's great. How you want to get there, though, is not by restricting access, not by making more complex rules, not by asking for more documentation. Um, it should be ideally through a combination of increased staff, increased training, updated eligibility systems, updated computer systems. That stuff takes time and money, not necessarily things that states have right now, with the cost shift on the horizon. So it's a hard ask. But it's an investment. It's a trade-off for these proven strategies to reduce error rates over the long run, so that way cost shifts will be the payments that states will have to make in their cost shifts will be lower more consistently in the years going forward. Lastly, on a federal level, um, anti-hunger groups have been trying to make a push for a 2-year delay in the benefit cost shift. There's some weird politics here, and just goes kind of how it shows how silly the law has been set up, where states with the very highest error rates, actually get a couple of years extra in terms of a delay before their benefit cost shift goes into effect. Pennsylvania is kind of a little bit in the middle, where they have a 10.76% error rate, and you need like a 13.33% to qualify for that delay. So there's that provision creates a really weird incentive structure where they could increase their error rate by 2 or 3 points to get a delay, not something that people want, or they could decrease their error rate by 4 or 5 points to not be responsible for a cost shift and pay nothing. But one of those is much easier to do than the other one. So the federal push here is being like, let's make sure all states get that extra 2-year delay, get some extra time for states to hire more staff, do more training, update their eligibility system, so it's easier for them to go and find ways to reduce their error rates and not have to pay as much in the cost shift, lest we be in danger of states looking for ways to cut costs, cut benefits for folks. That's all I have now. Sorry if I went a little bit over here. I think I might. I think I'm kicking it to Susan at this point.
Yes, Kyle. Kyle, thank you so much. This report just came out recently, and as soon as the Policy Center saw it, we knew we needed to share this out, especially because of the impact and the harm that we're starting to see right now that's occurring. And so, thank you for that. Once again, feel free to use the chat in order to have questions for Kyle or any of our other speakers. And now it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Susan Gobreski, the president of the League of Women Voters. Susan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. So I have played a couple of roles in Pennsylvania. I'm actually also a senior advisor with Pennsylvania Policy Center, so very happy to join my colleagues today. And in my spare time as a volunteer, I serve on the statewide board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, which is a nonpartisan but not opinionless organization. The League was founded to help get women registered, get women to vote. At the time, they meant white women. A lot of work has been done to help address that injustice over time. The League continues to be aware of that shortcoming and work to change it, and recognizing that the voting franchise affects everyone who's disenfranchised. Pleased to be a part of an organization that is actively working to address harm that has been caused or done. The League has been, in recent years, a really significant player in Pennsylvania's landscape, helping to litigate over voter ID law back in 2012, playing a significant role in legislation, fighting some of the big issues that happened in the 2020 election. And some of the following issues, including efforts by the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee, their efforts to subpoena legislation or subpoena the voter files for Pennsylvania, including not just the publicly available information. Anyone in Pennsylvania can actually get a list of voters in Pennsylvania for $20. It just doesn't include a bunch of private information like driver's license numbers, social security numbers. There was an effort by a subcommittee to get the voter file and turn it over to a vendor. Pennsylvania, the Department of Justice is federally is now litigating Pennsylvania amongst other states to try and get their hands on the voter file, working to create this like crazy database of voters for the purposes of controlling it. So I just wanted to briefly cover a couple of key things about what's going on right now with elections. So there are several attempts, and I've got colleagues here who are as able or better able than I am to address this. But from the point of view, the League of Women Voters is about making sure that women in particular have the right to vote. So there's been a suite of bills. There's not just one SAVE Act, there are three. There's the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, the SAVE Act, which passed the House in 2025. There's also now a Save America Act, and then the Make Elections Great Again Act, which have stricter components than the SAVE Act, like requirements for voters to present documentary proof of citizenship, both at registration and at the polls, and for absentee ballots. This essentially all is infrastructure that would put DHS in charge of overseeing American voter registration. I'm also going to talk about the president's executive order efforts to issue an executive order, but briefly, the proposed changes to the law, are not about making our elections more secure. They're actually about making our elections more exclusive. It means that the way that the law would be implemented, it would present a lot of changes and barriers that make it hard for millions of Americans. So military voters, for example, would have to require documentation every time they re-register to vote when their family moves. Families impacted by natural disasters who have lost important documents would have a hard time with this. Sometimes those documents have been destroyed. Obtaining copies, getting new documents is expensive, time-consuming. Natural disasters don't actually wait till 30 days or 60 days, don't stop happening 60 days before an election. So you might, women in particular, so I have a couple of stats here. Apparently, the estimates are 69 million women who are married and have don't have a birth certificate, like a legal certified birth certificate. Your birth certificate obviously does not include your married name, so it would say you have to have a passport. Real ID, actually, a lot of people are like, oh, it'll be fine. Real ID actually will not work for documentary proof of citizenship. People of color are 3 times more likely to lack documents such as birth certificates, passports, naturalization certificates, or face difficulties accessing them. Only about half of all Americans possess a passport. 2/3 of Black Americans don't. Any law that proposes to treat one class of citizens differently than another is a huge problem, likely to lose in court, which also means they would be creating a lot of chaos in election law, election administration, and election implementation when they're likely to lose in court. So when you're creating a set of rules that say, here are the rules for women and here are the rules for men, it's a huge problem. I'm actually I'll drop a link in the chat here. There are numerous articles. I know a lot of folks have been following this issue, but it's incredibly important to pay attention to the details because they've tried to position this as a voter ID bill. But, first of all, Pennsylvania has voter ID. We have to do it when you're registering to vote. You have to do it the first time you appear at a polling location. You have to do it. You have to be able to verify your identity when you vote by mail. So what it is they're using that as a screen. People have the right to pick. We pick our elected officials. It's not supposed to be elected officials picking us. Clearly, this is an effort to keep lots of people off the voter rolls. 21 million Americans lack access to all of these documents. It would also there are other issues, right? It would cause chaos this year. The law, if passed, would go into effect overnight, which would change the rules for elections that are already in progress. Primaries are being held, elections are being scheduled. So there are 2 possibilities. One is that people won't hear about it and they won't be able to respond in time to actually cast a vote. Or the other thing, and this is part of the chaos, people hear about this now, In our last election and the one before that, I would hear people talking about, well, I don't think I have the right qualifications, so I don't think I'm going to vote because I am not in a position to chase down what I need to chase down. So even the rumor of these things actually disenfranchises people and keeps people from voting. It would also affect voter registration. Only 6% of people currently register in person, and the bill would force the vast majority of Americans to change how they sign up to vote. And I think a lot of people don't understand that it would happen overnight. It would also, this suite of pieces of legislation would actually transfer essentially power to the United States Postal Service. So the U.S. Postal Service would be responsible for verifications, making decisions about who's eligible, about what counts. It's a terrible, terrible proposal. I will actually, when I'm done talking, I will drop a few more links. And as a quick reminder, it is already illegal for non-citizens to register and vote in federal and state elections. And furthermore, these efforts, when Congress passes a law, that's one thing. When you're talking about what the president has been trying to do with executive orders, you may have followed the recent efforts on executive orders. The Constitution clearly delegates authority for elections to the states. Let me just pull that part up. So the president does not have any legal authority to set rules for elections. And yet these executive orders are essentially asserting a right that he does not have. He's lost in court. Judges have ruled against it. This is an effort for the president to try and take power, to control who can vote. And this is, as we would likely be a slippery slope. You get away with one executive order, you get to the next one. It's an effort to keep people from voting and to keep votes from counting. The authority needs to remain with the states. One of the judges said, put simply, our Constitution does not allow the president to impose unilateral changes to federal election procedures. This executive order is likely to be bravado, but again, cause chaos, cause things to get tied up in courts, cause chaos with states. Happy to answer questions. There are things that we talk about, but taking action on a regular basis is important. You might call about the SAVE Act or send an email about the SAVE Act. It's important to stay on it. We have 2 senators in the United States, or in Pennsylvania, representing Pennsylvania. We've heard positive-ish things from one, negative from another. It's important that they feel the heat, even whether or not you think they agree with you or they disagree with you. Incredibly important to make sure that we keep making our voices heard, that this doesn't fade away. Again, if chaos is the point, one of the things is to wear people out. Oh, I've already called about that issue. There are so many issues to call about. We all have time to make a couple of phone calls. I also mentioned, I saw a question, and I know we'll get to some of these, but a question about our Attorney General. Yes, our Attorney General is elected. Will be elected again in 2 years. And our Attorney General should also feel the heat. Currently, there is a standing litigation between the Department of Justice has subpoenaed Pennsylvania's files. That is being fought in court. Voter files. So there's a lot to do. We can stay on it. And again, even because politicians don't always agree with us, that shouldn't actually get them a pass. We used to have Rick Santorum here back in the old days, and people would constantly not target him because they would say that there's no hope that he'll come around on these issues, which meant his phone stayed silent. I think it's really important that we stay engaged and keep focused on these issues and identify steps to take. But that's the way that that's where things are. Women, people of color, poor people, rural people who have to travel farther in many cases will all be disproportionately affected, and that is not an accident. I'm turning it back over to Dwayne, and I will post some links. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. And as always, please feel free to drop your questions for Susan or any of our other speakers in the chat. I am really pleased now to introduce Kadida Kenner from the New Pennsylvania Project. Kadida, welcome to the call. I know you've just had a big trip, and I'm anxious to hear what your takeaways are there. You do incredible work in the state of Pennsylvania, you and your organization, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dwayne. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be with my old colleagues, my previous colleagues. So good to see you all. I have a brief PowerPoint. I want to share a few slides as I want to talk a little bit about, deepening democracy. And I want to talk about it here at home and then also abroad. As Dwayne mentioned, I'm just getting back into the States. I spent 8 days in Germany, in Berlin, in Eastern Germany, in the states of Saxony. I spent some days in Warsaw and heard from a lot of folks from Turkey about, what is happening in the world. And I don't know if I take comfort in this in any way, but they're experiencing a lot of the same things that we're experiencing here in the States. And so it was a lot of parallels that I like to share with you. I have a quick PowerPoint, so I'm going to share that if I have access. I do. And let me go ahead and share that here. All right. Excuse all my slides. Okay. Um, can we see okay here, Dwayne? We're good to go?
There we go.
Yep.
Now we're good. Now we're
Okay.
good. Yep.
All right. Great, great. Okay. Well, I'm going to always start with my main man, and that is Congressman John Lewis, who reminds us that the vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent we have in a democratic society. And that's really what this is all about in this moment. And that is deepening democracy so that it is realized for all. And so, as we're out here as an organization, the New Pennsylvania Project, we are year-round voting rights civil society organization, making sure people understand how important it is to vote in every single election, not just during the presidential ones. And we're also reminding people, especially young people, that our lives are political. The number one thing we hear on the ground from individuals who are trying to register to vote and get voting is they'll say that they're just not into politics. And we remind them that politics are into you. And if that goes from the number one issue, which is affordable housing, to the number two issue, which is education and equitable and education for kids, to legalization of marijuana. These are all issues that are brought up and are discussed as we talk about our lives being political and everything that revolves around what we care about being political as well. I'll share with you this alarming statistic about who is not registered to vote in the Commonwealth. And unfortunately, that's 1.65 million Pennsylvanians eligible to vote and not registered in this very moment. 1.65 million. The number just goes up every year. And no matter how many people we register to vote as an organization or our colleagues across the state, we still can't close this registration gap. It just gets bigger every year. And we have the problem of trying to overcome the objections of what we are hearing on the ground. Why don't people want to get involved in the democratic process? It's about overcoming their objections. And a lot of those have to do with the fact that they're not into politics, or so they say, or they believe that their vote doesn't count, meaning that they've been voting all of these years and nothing is really changing in their communities. Or they'll say, I'm formerly incarcerated and I can't vote. And we have to overcome that objection about the fact that they absolutely can cast a ballot in the Commonwealth, the fact that we're a closed primary state, and that we are eliminating a lot of folks from casting ballots in primary elections for candidates when they don't choose to belong to either the Democratic or Republican Party. And then the fact that we vote twice a year, every year here in the Commonwealth, and it's not just during presidential election years. And maybe we're too much in our bubble and we understand this, but the majority of people that we're engaging on the ground really need to hear this information. So I'll share with you just a little bit of data here because I'm with the folks that love to talk about budgets and numbers and all that. So I want to share with you, this is from the voter files and also census data, who it is that is not registered to vote and why an organization like ours exists to close that registration gap, particularly in communities of color. We center any community that needed a constitutional amendment or needed an act in actually to cast a ballot. And so if you look at these numbers, you see where the largest gap exists, and it's in communities of color in Pennsylvania. And that's why we must close this gap. And when I look at my own community, the Black community, 1 in 4 Black folks in Pennsylvania eligible to vote and not registered. You look in the Latino and Asian American Pacific Islander community, 10 folks in a room, the odds are only 4 of them are registered to vote, eligible to vote, not registered. So that gap is large. And then we look at the other and unknown, and that huge number of 64% includes a lot of the indigenous population in Pennsylvania and also those that choose or select multiple races belonging to self-identifies belonging to multiple races. And so all of this leads us to know that we have almost a 17% voter registration gap, meaning only 83% of Pennsylvanians who are eligible to vote are actually registered to vote, with that largest gap existing in communities of color. And so we have lots of work to do to ensure that. And folks always wonder, where do all these unregistered folks live? Well, obviously, it's going to be in the larger cities. So Philadelphia, Allegheny is going to pop up a lot of times when we talk about who's not registered to vote. But then you also see the collar counties around Philadelphia, lots of populous places where people are living. And then if you're looking specifically at people of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, you'll see again big cities, and then the collar counties of Philadelphia and other locations. And so lots of work to do to get that done. So I'm going to move on because we all have a role in ensuring that our democracy is realized, that we're deepening democracy. We're not trying to defend it because it has not always worked for everybody. We don't want to go back to the old ways of democracy. We want to expand it. We want to deepen it. And I had the pleasure, as Dwayne mentioned, to spend all of last week in Europe, and grateful for this opportunity to spend there with eight colleagues of mine across the state, including the Secretary of State. Albert Schmidt was with us, leaders of other civil society organizations like Mike Lee from the ACLU. Got to spend some incredible time with councilperson Rue Landau, Philadelphia, Judge Nichols, and others. And we just had a really great time together to learn from each other and to go on a study tour of Eastern Europe, including Berlin, including Leipzig and Dresden, spending time in Warsaw. I had the pleasure of going to Warsaw last year for a conference in regards to the rule of law. And it's just a lot of the parallels that exist that you'll see in pro-democracy civil societies. And it's being attacked transatlantically. It's not just a U.S. problem. This is something that's happening across the globe and with our friends in Europe. And that we need global solidarity in this moment, that pro democracy actors need to have more exchanges and dialogues with each other. We need to learn from each other. The best part of my trip is dropping off gifts to the East Germans, folks that are living in East Germany, to let them know that if they want to really organize and overcome what is happening in their rise of the Nazi Party, essentially, the AFD, they need to make sure that they are working in coordination with organizations led by communities of color to help suppress what is happening in this moment. You'll see that this is from a museum in Eastern Germany, and Black Lives Matter is right up there. With all the other things that are happening that say their names, that's something that's also happening. There is a political party called the Alternative for Deutschland, otherwise known as Alternative for Germany. They are the rise of the neo-Nazi party. It is happening in this very moment. They are on the rise, and they are capturing the votes of young people in particular, which is very concerning in this time in European countries, where it's not just the young men, it's not just 18 to 24-year-old young men in Germany, it's also your young women as well, having these same sentiments of othering of others and feeling as though people are problems, migration is a problem, that human beings can be problems, that you can capture the justice system, that you can capture culture. The AFD is really about this replacement theory and thinking that folks are going to be replaced by the others that come in. And so the rule of law is in danger, but it must be also noted that the independence of the German courts is still maintaining, it's still intact. And same thing happening here in Pennsylvania. And we lead here with Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, and recognizing just how important it is, the courts, and that their independence remain intact. Our existence is resistance in this moment. And if we're going to overcome the issues we're having, not only here in this country, but globally, we need to be working in coordination with one another. And so here's a couple pictures. I had the pleasure to spend some time in the German parliament in Berlin, got a nice tour of the parliament. The flags there are at half mast because a legislator was killed. And so the flags there in Germany at half mast, recognizing that. But it was a great experience spending time in East Germany. This is lots of graffiti. It's a huge graffiti culture, particularly in Warsaw and Eastern Germany. And so with the rise of what is happening there, it is also the rise of the anti-fascists trying to push back against what is happening there in this moment. So I leave it there. And just a reminder to everybody is that please check your voter registration status. Make sure you're still registered to vote. Make sure no shenanigans have happened to you and that you are active and in the system and you know where your polling location is. And then I'll end this today by always what I do, no matter if I'm in Philadelphia or if I'm in Pittsburgh, I say go Birds, go vote. And then maybe I'll change it around a little bit and say go Steelers, go vote. But go Birds, go vote.
Kadida, amazing message as always, and such love for you out here. Such an important message, and thank you for sharing that perspective too. We don't often hear about that, and it's so important. And if there's any questions in the chat, just go ahead and jump in on those. All of our speakers, because we are running short on time, but there was such important content here. So once again, put your questions in the chat, and speakers, if you're able to answer any of those, go ahead and jump in and put those in. And now it is my pleasure to help us unpack a graphic we recently saw from Americans for Tax Fairness that got our attention, talking about billionaires investing and taking over our democracy. I'm going to turn it right over to John Foti from Americans for Tax Fairness.
Thanks, Dwayne, and thanks so much to the PA Penn Policy team for having me. And Kadida, love your presentation. I have so many questions to ask you, but I want to first go through, as Dwayne mentioned, a resource that we at Americans for Tax Fairness just dropped prior and ahead of No Kings. Which is our resource that we've been doing, which is our what we call our billionaire buying elections reports. And our theme ahead of No Kings was not kings and no billionaire kings makers either. And as we have been doing our research on how billionaires are influencing our election system, what we have found is that billionaire families have already pumped $433 million into political campaigns ahead of the midterm elections this November. And everything I just want to make sure folks understand, everything I'm saying is very C3 compliant. This is very just mostly looking at the hard data and looking at who as it goes to. So no worries about anything there for folks to be able to know, or sharing the report that I just dropped in the chat. And so again, $433 million already pumped into the midterm election campaigns. And that is in March of this year, right? It has been a week and a half since we released this report, and we know that there are still roughly 6-7 months to go to the election day, where that number is likely to reach over $1 billion, which would be a historic level of billionaire influence in U.S. elections. And when you look at the candidates that these super PACs and other PACs are backing, roughly 80% of that spending so far, $345 million, has gone to Republican candidates, and 20% of it has gone to Democratic candidates or super PACs backing Democratic causes. So there's a real lopside in the political parties that is being supported by billionaire wealth. And if you look at the top 7 contributors have donated almost half of the total so far, roughly $211 million. And most of that has come from Elon Musk, as well as Mark Rowan, Ronald Lauder, Reid Hoffman, and a few others, folks who have also been directly implicated in the Epstein files as well, and having close ties to Jeffrey Epstein. So the thing to walk away here from looking at is this is what billionaires are spending their tax cuts on. They got tax cuts from Donald Trump and the Republican Congress last year, and now they are using a fraction of that to put that money back into the political system with the hopes that they are able to purchase a Congress that will keep those billionaire tax cuts coming while continuing to cut our healthcare and food assistance as well. And this doesn't just warp, our economy; it warps everything in our democracy. So this essentially means that our campaign finance laws will continue to be gutted and continue to be challenged, and right now are largely going unenforced. So folks may hear rules and laws around, oh well, super PACs aren't technically allowed to do this, or super PACs aren't technically allowed to do that. We have seen the way this administration has largely unenforced election laws up until this point, and so that tells us that there is likely a greater amount of coordination happening among these billionaires and super PACs that would otherwise not even be legal if we actually had a FEC that was enforcing a lot of these laws that are currently on the books. And typically, one thing I also just want to leave folks with is typically midterm elections are actually have less campaign spending than presidential contests. So while billionaires families contributed $2.6 billion to campaigns in 2024, a more useful comparison is in 2022 when billionaire donations topped $1 billion. So given how early it is in the process, like I said earlier, and it's hard to predict how giving is going to change over the next couple of months, we can already say that it is likely that billionaire families will pump over $1 billion into the upcoming midterm elections. And the whole purpose of that, we know, is to try to defend a current system that is giving them tax cuts at the expense of the rest of us. And so in our resource, you will have a fuller breakdown of the top 15 billionaire backed PACs. To no surprise, MAGA Inc., the super PAC that backs the president, is first on that list with having received $89 million from billionaire families. And if there's one more thing I want to leave folks with, it is not just billionaires themselves who are donating this money. It is also groups that they set up hiding behind certain industry trades that are also donating this money. The most likely which is a PAC you may have heard of called Fair Shake PAC, which is the crypto industry PAC that is currently donating money to a lot of candidates in an attempt to get more tax or more and preferential tax breaks to the crypto industry through Congress while they still have control of it this year. So this is a very direct connection that we are seeing, the influence on our democracy, the influence on our economy. And as a previous speaker said, the warped mentality it takes when all these billionaires are pumping money into the election, and many people are feeling powerless because the only thing they have to offer is one vote. And if there's one thing I could leave everyone with, is that vote is worth infinitely more than any dollar a billionaire can give. And if it wasn't, they wouldn't be trying to make it so darn hard for you to be able to go to the ballot box and make your voice heard. So hopefully that resource is helpful to folks. And again, all of the information here in this report is C3 compliant. So while, always encourage everyone to follow the law and all those rules and regulations, we can still talk about the facts before us and where the money is going without violating any of those rules.
Foti, that was an amazing, all of you. This was an amazing call, such incredible information. They have billionaires, we have each other. I dropped in the chat our tax day plans for Harrisburg. Once again, please sign up. Let's stand up. Let's stand together. Let's make sure that billionaires are accountable and that our elected officials are accountable and that we have a budget that reflects our values and not pumping it right back into this corruption that we see around billionaires spending money in our political system. So a big thank you out to the whole team here, our speakers, the whole team at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Please feel free to join us, share the information for Harrisburg and also our policy action call, which is in the chat. I want to thank all of you for hanging in there with this call today and for all the work that you do. Thank you.